Hi and welcome to Swedish Plant Guys. Now there are a lot of different types of substrates, inorganic types of substrates that can help your soil to become better and you can get good drainage. Now we have a video on good drainage if that is what you're after, and in that video we tell you that you can use different types of substrates. But what are those substrates? What do they do? And what are the differences between these substrates? And that is what we're going to find out today. Just the basics on each and every one. And we have LECA, we have Perlite, we have Pumice and Vermiculite. Now what is the difference and what should you use? And we will also in this video recommend the amount you should mix in with your soil to get the best results. Now if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please do, and hit the bell as well so you get a notification every time we put up something new. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram where you can get small sneak previews on upcoming videos and always something extra. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. That really helps our channel a lot. So before I go into these 4 different substrates that you can use in your soil mix, we have to talk a little bit about why do we have to add any of these? Well, I have a normal standard planting soil here. It usually looks like this. Now, what is the problem that we can't just use this? Well, one of the problems is that normal planting soil usually have very small grain sizes inside of the soil. That means that it can usually suck up and absorb a lot of water, and usually too much water, at least for the tropical plants that we want to have indoors. So we want to add something that helps us get better drainage and a better balance of water and oxygen in your pots. Now another problem with standard planting soil is that it has a lot of organic materials. Now that is good for your plants, of course, but over time that organic material is starting to decompose, breaking down, and your soil is going to get really compact. It doesn't hold water the same way as it did before, and you get problems with your roots. Now by adding inorganic material to your soil, you actually prevent that and help the soil to be better and have good drainage for a longer period of time. So with us here today we have 4 different inorganic substrates that actually help your soil to become better. You get better drainage, but which one should you choose and what's the difference between these? Now the first one is the most commonly used one and has been used for a very long period of time, and that is the LECA pebbles, or it actually is called light expanded clay aggregates, and that is the shortage for that is LECA, and it looks like this. They are small pebbles that are really lightweight, and this is actually clay that has been heated up by man, and when you do that they pack together to form these small pebbles or small balls of clay that are really lightweight, and if you crush them you can see that inside of them they are very porous. They have a lot of air inside of them and they have a harder shell around them. Now what we usually use LECA for and is to inside of your pots, we usually put LECA in the bottom of the pot, and this really helps with the drainage in your pot because all of that water is going to go through your soil and end up in the bottom down with the LECA, so it helps with the drainage. But you can also use LECA to mix it up together with your planting soil. And when you do that, what happens is that the LECA actually helps with a couple of things. It helps you to get more air to the roots, because you are adding larger grain sizes to this, which means that more water is going to drain out of the pot and more air can get into the roots. What you're also doing is that you're helping the soil to stay as it is. It's not going to decompose, it's not going to be compact over time. The LECA actually helps the soil to maintain its structure for a long period of time. However, the disadvantages of LECA is that this dries out really, really quickly. So you're not helping with water in your soil. You're helping with a lot of oxygen and you're helping with the drainage, but you're not adding water in the right way. And it dries out very, very quickly. Also, the LECA doesn't have a very high cation exchange capacity called CEC. What that means is that the LECA is not good at binding nutrients. When you add fertilizer to your substrate, whichever you have, you're usually adding that in the form of salt in your water. And that salt needs to have something to hold on to so that the roots can access those salts, access those nutrients. Now, the LECA has a very low cation exchange capacity. That's something that is good to know when you're adding this to your soil. But when you have a lot of organic materials in your normal planting soil, that usually doesn't mean much because the organic material has a high cation exchange capacity. But you need to know that it is quite low for the LECA. Now, when you're adding LECA to your soil, our recommendation is that you use around 20% of volume of LECA to your soil. That is a good mixture that provides that good drainage. And use the bigger LECA in the bottom of the pot and use smaller sized LECA when you mix it up with the soil, and you get perfect drainage. LECA is also often used, or most commonly used, in something called hydroculture. And that is when you are growing your plants without soil. You're just growing it straight into an inorganic material. And LECA is the most commonly used hydroculture substrate. And it is perfect for that. And the reason for that is that it's adding a lot of oxygen into that water-based substrates, or that water culture that you're growing your plants in. One of the best advantages of using LECA is that it's very, very cheap. It's easy to get a hold of, and it usually doesn't cost that much. So it will not hurt your wallet to add LECA to your soil, and that is, of course, a good thing. Now, the second substrate that we have here today is something called perlite. Now, perlite is a natural material as well. It is a form of glass fiber mineral, a volcanic glass fiber mineral. And when you heat that up, it's also heated by man, and when you do that, it actually pops. It expands in between 7 to 16 times its volume. And when it does that, you get this very porous, pure white material. And this material, first of all, I want to say that when you have perlite, when you are handling perlite, it is a glass fiber material. So we recommend you to always handle it a little bit wet, because the dust from this, it won't hurt you, but it's not good to inhale that dust because it is glass fiber. So what we do is that we just rinse it a little bit with water when we're handling it. So the perlite I have here is actually a little bit wet, and that is because I don't want the dust to get into my body. The perlite is extremely porous, and it can absorb more water than LECA. However, it doesn't absorb a lot of water. What it adds to your soil here is oxygen. As I said before, when you have your standard planting soil, usually it sucks up a lot of water. And what that water does is that it's pushing out all of the oxygen. And you need to have that balance between water and oxygen. By adding perlite to your soil, you're adding oxygen. And you're also helping to get better drainage. So a lot of that water, more of that water is going to go out of the pot and you get more air to your roots. But how much perlite should you mix with your planting soil? Well, we have over 20 years experience of taking care of plants, and our experience is that you should mix somewhere around 20 to 30% of perlite to your soil mix, and that is in volume, not weight, because perlite is extremely lightweight. So if it was in weight, then you would be adding way too much perlite. But 20 to 30% in volume to your soil is a good mix for most plants. Now perlite, like LECA, it does dry out fairly quickly, and that is also something you need to consider. So both LECA and perlite works very, very good with plants that wants to dry out quickly in between watering. So these are the substrates that are perfect for those type of plants. Perlite has a very low cation exchange capacity, which is also something you need to know when adding this to your soil. So you need to have a soil that has something else that are able to bind those nutrients when you add fertilizer to your mix. But usually if you have a standard planting soil, as I said before, you have organic materials in here that has that cation exchange capacity. But it's good to know that it's low in perlite. And perlite is also used as in hydroculture and hydroponics, where you do not grow your plants in soil. And you could grow small plants in pure perlite as well. That is one of the uses for this material. However, it is so lightweight and it has so much oxygen inside of it that perlite actually floats a little bit. So it's not an optimum substrate to be using straight in water. This is a material that we only have a certain amount on our planet of perlite. So it's going to run out. Now, there are so much of it that it's not going to run out for a long period of time. But that is also something to consider when using perlite, because it's better to use a substrate, I think, that we have more and more of than use something that eventually we will run out of. So that is something to consider concerning perlite. However, it is a very, very cheap substrate. So it doesn't cost you much to add perlite to your soil. Now the third substrate we have here today is a substrate that we use a lot. If you follow this channel, you know that we use pumice for almost anything. And we have a all you need to know about pumice video where we tell you how you can grow your plants in pure pumice or almost pure pumice, so that you're not adding standard planting soil, you're just growing in pumice. We put a link to that up there. But what is this? Well, this is a volcanic material that is fairly lightweight. It's not like perlite or LECA, it's a little bit heavier, but this is actually what comes out of the volcano first. When a volcano erupts, this is the lightest material that is just thrown out of the volcano. So this is not man-made, this is made inside of the volcano. So it's a natural compound and it's a natural mineral. Now, the pumice is also extremely porous. It has a lot of nooks and crannies and cavities inside of it. Now, the biggest reason for using pumice is that while perlite and LECA adds a lot of oxygen to your soil. If you mix pumice with your soil, you're not only adding oxygen, you're adding water as well. But it also helps with good drainage. Now I'll try and explain that. When you're adding the pumice, you're adding bigger grain sizes, which means that the soil will drain out a little bit more. So you get away with that excess water that you do not want. But your plant loves water, it needs water. So what if the substrate could also provide water, but not too much water? Pumice has that perfect mixture because pumice absorbs around 30 to 40% of its volume with water. And then it has around 30% of oxygen as well, inside of all of these small cavities around this small stone. So when you mix pumice with your soil, you're adding both oxygen and water to get that perfect, good drainage, but still having the balance of water and oxygen. Now, pumice also doesn't dry out very quickly like perlite or LECA does. It holds that moisture for a little bit longer, which can be a positive thing, but it can also be a negative thing, depending on which type of plant you are potting. So what amount of pumice should you use in your soil mix? Well, our experience is that in between 20 and 30% of pumice in volume are added to your soil. That gives that perfect drainage to your standard planting soil and will help almost any type of tropical plants to have a healthier root system and grow even better. And what happens in pumice is that the roots will actually move into these stones. There will be small, fine roots that just latches on to each and every pumice stone to get that perfect oxygen and water. However, there is a disadvantage of pumice, and that is that it also has a fairly low cation exchange capacity. It has some capacity to bind nutrients, but not a lot. And that is the biggest negative thing if you're just planting in pumice. Then you have to add something that can hold and bind those nutrients. And usually we are adding clay to our mixture of pumice when we're growing in pure pumice. We're adding clay to get that cation exchange capacity. But when you mix pumice in normal planting soil, that is not a problem. So you get all of those positive things to your soil. However, pumice is really expensive. Not cheap like LECA or Perlite. It costs fairly a lot, at least here in Sweden. I know that in some places of the world they are a little bit cheaper, but it costs a lot to use pumice. The positive thing there is that you can reuse pumice. Perlite and LECA, it's more difficult to reuse it because you have to just take it away when you're repotting. But pumice you can reuse and reuse. Just rinse it off and use it again. Now the last substrate I have here with me is something called, and I think I'm pronouncing this correctly, vermiculite. Vermiculite in Swedish. Now vermiculite is also extremely lightweight. And this is a form of clay that also has been heated by man, just like perlite and LECA. And when you heat that mineral, it also pops, almost like popcorn. However, it doesn't have the same structure as perlite. Perlite is just a round ball, like a popcorn. But vermiculite actually has a more of a cylindrical shape. And that cylindrical shape is almost like a sponge. So this substrate can absorb a lot of water, 3 to 4 times its own weight of water. And when it does that, that small cylindrical form actually just expands like this. So it doesn't expand all around, It expands in that cylindrical shape, almost like an accordion does. And it absorbs a lot of water. However, it still has the abilities that all of the other substrates has. When you mix this up with your standard planting soil, it helps a little bit with the drainage because you get bigger grain sizes in your soil. However, the vermiculite absorbs so much water that you have to make sure that it is a plant that wants a lot of water, that you're using vermiculite to. And we recommend that you use around 10 to 20% of volume in your soil of vermiculite. That is usually enough, because if you add more of that vermiculite, you get so much water in your soil, and that for most plants gets to be too much. But if you have a water-loving plant, let's say for instance like the peace lily that wants to stay wet most of the time, then vermiculite is a perfect substrate to use, because you get good drainage and also you get water to the roots because it holds that much water. Now, another positive thing about vermiculite is that it has a fairly high cation exchange capacity. It is a form of clay, so it holds on to a lot of nutrients. So when you're adding this to your soil, you're adding more ways of binding nutrients, which can be a positive thing. And the last thing about vermiculite is that it, at least here in Sweden, it is a fairly cheap product. It costs around the same as perlite, which isn't much. So it's quite easy to have it and use it inside of your soil. Now, I also know that vermiculite is also used as a standalone substrate for seedlings and cuttings. Because of that extreme capacity to hold water, you can actually ease that transition from a cutting that has been standing in pure water. If you plant that in pure vermiculite, and then after a while you replant that in a vermiculite soil mixture, then you're making that transition easier for the plant than just taking a water-rooted cutting and just putting it into soil. Some plants have a problem with that transition, but you can help that by just using pure vermiculite. So to summarize this, what type of substrate should you use for your tropical indoor plants? Well, that is completely dependent on what type of a plant it is. Go in and see what your plant needs. Does it want to dry out completely in between waterings? Well, then you probably should be somewhere around here. Use LECA, Perlite, or maybe Pumice, where it adds a lot of that oxygen, adds good drainage to your pot, and not a lot of water. But if you have a plant that wants a lot of water and should maybe never dry out, then you should be on this spectrum here. Use Vermiculite or Pumice, which contains and holds quite a lot of water, but also adds that oxygen, so you get that perfect balance. So which one you choose is completely dependent on what type of tropical plant you are potting. Now, I hope this video can help you to get your plants to thrive even better, to get that good drainage, to get those healthy roots, which means if you have healthy roots, you have a healthy growing plant. Now, if you've liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. That really helps our channel a lot. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please do, and hit the bell as well so you get a notification every time we put up something new. And of course, like us on Facebook and Instagram to get sneak previews on upcoming videos and sometimes that little bit of extra material. Now, until next time, hej då!